Good morning, everyone. I know all of you probably want to take a break, but we really need to jump into our next presentation, if that's okay. Please go ahead, grab a cup of something and return to your seats if you're interested. If you're not, please be my guest and go ahead, catch a coffee. Um, can you all hear me okay? Okay. Oh, it's almost working. Okay. Hope everyone had a great 4th of July weekend. And my name is Katrina Pryor. I'm an actuary at Rail and Letson. And before I start, I want to thank Badavian Associates for the invitation to present today. And I also want to thank all of you who are joining us in person or virtually for taking time out of your, I know, busy and crazy schedules to join me for another hour for my presentation. And for my particular topic, I envision to cover big recent developments and their impact on your agency's pension and OPEB. And of course, by no means this is a comprehensive list of everything that's happening in our crazy world, but I'm just trying to highlight the biggest factors that will be driving your net and net pension and OPEB liability. And a few more words I want to say is that throughout my presentation, I will be talking a lot about CalPERS. And the reason is CalPERS is the biggest provider of both pension and OPEB benefits by far for public agencies. So it's most relevant. And also the information is easy to get, most of the information is easy to get and present. And the other thing is, throughout my presentation, I will be referring a lot to fiscal year. And when I talk about fiscal year, I really mean the year that runs from July 1st to June 30, a most common fiscal year for public agencies in California. I understand that some of you might be representing agencies that on a slightly different schedule, which is fine. The information will still be relevant. It's just timing going to be switched just a little bit. Okay, having said that, let's dive in. And the first thing I want to cover is market volatility we experienced earlier this year. And feels like ages ago, but just 3 months ago, we all saw a huge investment volatility when the tariffs were announced. And actually, at her interview Marcy Frost gave to Washington Post just 3 months ago, she said that CalPERS lost $26 billion with a B after tariffs were announced, after their high of $532 billion. And she also warned that, as of 3 months ago, she was warning us that we're not out of the woods yet, and we should expect that the volatility will be impacted investment returns way into 25-26 fiscal year. But that was 3 months ago. Feels like ages ago. What happened after? So what happened? Actually, markets rebounded quite a bit. In fact, CalPERS reported their assets at $555.8 billion as of June 30th, 2025. This is quite a rebound. So a few notes on investment return. When you look at numbers, right away the question might be, so what was the return on investment for the year, right? Well, the caveat is that CalPERS even haven't published their preliminary investment return yet. We're expecting that number to be published sometime this month, hopefully soon, and it's not going to be even the final number. CalPERS portfolio is pretty involved, and it has holds some private investments which are hard to assess right away. So they will do a lot more work narrowing down the numbers and actually drilling in the numbers. And we will know the final investment return for CalPERS for fiscal year 24-25 in November, when they publish their financial statements. However, I'm an actuary, I cannot help myself, so I had to do some kind of estimate. So I did. And my estimate for the year is 9.7%, which is good, but it is freaking amazing considering just 3 months ago we were looking at -5. So just think about it. 3 months ago, -5, they closed the year at 9.7%. It's almost 15% swing. quite a roller coaster if you were to ask me. So, okay, what else is important? Here I want to show you kind of big picture. Here you will see CalPERS return on investments for the last 30 years. And obviously you will notice we had our share of ups and downs. And the last 2 years with the 24-25 being in red because it's a very rough preliminary estimate that's going to be different once they publish final numbers. The last 2 years were pretty good, with 9.3% in fiscal year 23-24 and 9.7% in 24-25, roughly. So that's good. However, well, it has a lot of impact, and we're going to talk about the impact of those latest year's returns. It is important to keep in mind that both pension and OPEB are long-term liabilities. Your agencies, unless you have a closed plan, will be paying those off for years to come. So it's helpful to think about investments not only in terms of year-to-year volatility, but big picture over 20, 30 years. So that's why I want to show you this slide that shows you annual return if you were to take the last 5, 10, 20, or 30 years. And 5 and 10 is really for your information. Really what you should be focusing for the big picture is 20 and 30. And the returns are 6.6 and 7.5 respectively. So that's for the big picture in terms of returns. Okay, what else? Inflation. It's kind of old news, but it's still relevant. We had a pretty high inflation in the last several years, with it peaking at 8% in 2022. So quite high. We don't have 25 number, but it's important to remember. It's been pretty high in the last several years. Why does inflation matter? It matters less to your OPEB. It still matters, but for your OPEB benefits, it mostly drives your liability up because it increases medical costs, medical, dental, vision, wherever. For pension, it's much more involved. So what happens with high inflation for your pension? Well, let's think about your active employees. Your pensionable pay goes up. And let me take a step back and give you some background. For agencies and CalPERS, how do you contribute for your pension? Well, CalPERS issues you annually funding reports where they tell you two numbers that are important for contribution purposes. Percentage of your pay that you pay with your each payroll, that will cover your normal cost. And normal cost is a piece of benefits that your active employees earn of their future benefits. So that percentage is fixed and determined by CalPERS. Also, they're telling you a dollar amount to pay for their unfunded liability, to basically pay off your debt. And that's measured as a dollar amount. It's not tied to your payroll. So what happens when inflation goes up? Your payroll goes up. So you still have the same percentages, but you multiply it by a higher number. So you have to pay just more to CalPERS to cover the normal cost. And why? Because higher pay means that your employees will be having higher benefits once they retire. Because remember, pension is tied to the salary, right? So also, in addition to pay going up, PEPRA pay limit goes up. And PEPRA pay limit determines the base for pensionable payroll. So again, same thing, goes up, you're gonna have to pay more to CalPERS to cover it. And that's something you will notice right away because you pay contribution of pay to CalPERS percentage of pay with each payroll. However, when they go and do your next actual valuation, they're gonna see that, oh, because of the inflation, your payroll went higher than expected. You will see that as experience gain and loss. So it is gonna also trickle in your UEL payments. It's gonna make your liabilities higher and your unfunded status worse. and you will have to be paying it off. It's going to be spread out. It's not like write everything at the same time, but it's going to trickle in your unfunded liability payments. It's just less obvious because there are a lot of moving parts. Okay, so what about retirees? I think a lot of you will tell me, hey, Katrina, we have COLA, so we don't care if it was 8%. We're still paying up to COLA 2%. And in fact, 95% of employees under CalPERS have 2% COLAs. Well, that's all good and well, but what happens is in years where we have an excess of inflation over COLA, this excess is banked. And it's going to be used in the future when inflation is lower. So we're not quite in the woods yet, out of the woods yet. It is going to impact, but just down the road, slower, kind of spread out, but it's going to impact your contributions for your retirees. And the other thing is 3PA, Purchasing Power Protection Allowance. And that provision kicks in when COLA fails to catch up with inflation, which might be happening considering how high inflation has been lately. And what it meant to do is to keep benefits to your retirees is at least at 80%. When they drop below, 3PA kicks in automatically and the payments is made to keep a retiree at least at 80% of their benefits. So high inflation might well kick in 3PAs. Okay. So we discussed assets performed much better than expected in the last couple of, well, not much better, better than expected in the last couple of years, but inflation has been bad. So what does it mean for your liabilities? Well, to figure that out, we need to cover a few basics. I'm sorry, gonna try not to bore you too much, but let's talk about what your net liability is for both pension and OPEB. So your net liability is basically the difference between your total liability, which represents how much you owe, how much of your benefits are how much benefits your actives and retirees accrued at this point, minus assets, basically money set aside to pay off those liabilities. So pretty basic. So we know assets performed slightly better than expected, 2.5% in fiscal year 23-24 and almost 3% in 24-25. So great. Does it mean our liability goes down? Anyone want to say something here? Well, not necessarily, unfortunately, because it really depends on what's happening with our total liability. And to understand what's happening there, we need, again, to look into how it is calculated. So how do we calculate your total liability? Well, it consists of your liability at the beginning of the period, plus interest and normal cost. And again, normal cost is a piece of benefits that your active employees earn each year, accrue, and also gains and losses for assumptions and experience. Let's cover assumptions first. Whenever actuaries prepare evaluation, we have to rely on assumptions. We make assumptions for everything. Payroll increases, how long people will leave, when people will retire. We have to do that to give you the numbers. But CalPERS revises assumptions every 4 years, and the next revision will be in 2026. So assumption piece, assumption gain loss, has been 0 for the last several years. Okay, this is easy, this is 0. What about experience gain and loss? Well, this piece is going to be there always. And it's really tricky for us to predict as actuaries because experience basically accounts for everything. For example, your retirees living longer than expected, your active population staying and working longer, for example, and not retiring as expected, or for example, there is a new treatment and everyone lives till 100 years old. So this is all goes in experience. Or inflation and your payroll going higher than expected. That's all going to trickle through experience gain and losses. That's why I'm talked about inflation earlier, that's going to trickle in through your experience gain and losses. And one more caveat, funding versus accounting. Again, for CalPERS agencies, you have two types of reports. You have your funding report that you receive from CalPERS around August. And the purpose of that report is to provide you contribution levels, your percentages for your normal cost, and your UL payments. And then there is an accounting report, or GASB 68 report. The purpose of that report is to provide you data for your financial statements. And I hear a lot from my clients saying, hey, Katrina, I'm picking up a report you prepared for us, GASB 68, and we're looking at our funding report and they do not match. Well, yes. Unfortunately, they will never match, and that's because of a few reasons. They serve different purposes. One is to calculate your contributions amounts, and the other is your accounting report, the purpose of which is to make all of the agencies easily comparable to each other's, apples to apples. The other thing is timing is slightly different. For example, when you pick up your next actual report from CalPERS, your funding report, that will be released in August this year, it's going to be as of June 30, 2024. If you pick up a GASB 68 report for 24-25 fiscal year, it's going to be measured as of June 30, 24. So kind of should be comparable, but the problem is GASB 68 report is actually using census data and valuation that is as of June 30, 23. So there is 1 year lag in data. And things like inflation and payroll increases higher than expected, just not going to be there yet. They will be on your funding report, but not accounting. So the bottom line is different purposes, different timing, and they also use slightly different assumptions. So numbers will never gonna match. And why is it important? Because I want to talk about impact of asset return and inflation on different reporting, because it impacts them differently, but because they function differently. So first, GASB 68 or your accounting report. What's important is we saw good investment returns for the last 2 years, roughly 2.5, higher than expected in 23-24, and about 3% in 24-25. So for accounting, I really strongly believe that you're going to see in your accounting report for 24-25 net pension liability very close to what you reported in 2024 prior year. And that's because that additional 2.5, again, very quickly, when we report GASB 68 information in our 2025 financials, it's actually measured as of June 30, 24. So the good investment return of 23-24 plays a role. There is 1 year lag we need to keep in mind, and I know it's confusing. So we already know that 23-24 was pretty good. That extra 2.5% will be very close to covering interest, normal cost, and worse than expected experience. So you should be able to see very stable or maybe even slightly lower net pension liability once you report numbers in your upcoming financial statements. Please keep in mind there are a lot of things that go into calculations. For example, your particular agency might have had better or worse experience. You might have paid additional discretionary payments. So that all gonna make a huge difference. So if your agency has something like that, then this is not going to apply to you. But if there were no big changes, then yes, you can expect in 24-25 a stable net pension liability. And now that we actually in July and have a kind of ballpark estimate for 24-25 fiscal year return, which I estimated at 9.7, that also informs us what we can expect, not in this year, but next year for 25-26 reporting. Because remember, 1 year lag. And seems like their return will be even a little better, a little higher than expected for this year. So again, for 25, 26 reporting, I expect that your net pension liability for GASB 68 that goes into your financials will be close to current year and prior year, and hopefully even a little lower. Again, assuming there were no other big changes. So that's a good news, because for years I was explaining my clients, why do we have such a roller coaster with net pension liability, go up and down, up and down. It should be stable for the next couple of years, which is great. Okay, so funding and contributions. This works differently. So what's going to happen? Impact on contributions will not be seen right away. And a big one of the reasons is that there is a 2-year lag. For example, funding reports that you're going to receive next month will be as of June 30, 2024. And it will give you contribution numbers for 26, 27 fiscal year. So there is a big lag in time in there. And the other thing is, on the accounting side, there is no smoothing of assets, no phasing, no nothing. Assets reported as they are at market value of assets. On the funding, though, there is a 5-year phase-in, and all of the investment gain and losses are spread out and amortized over 20 years. So these small changes don't make much of a difference. They're going to be spread out over years. So you're just not going to see much of impact that you can actually point out because of those good investment returns. Okay. Another interesting development. That's all I wanted to say in terms of pension and inflation, high inflation and good investment returns. There is one more interesting thing, one more interesting development this year, and it really applies only to some of you guys. So under CalPERS, there are 2 types of agencies. Standalone plans, that those are the agencies which have typically more than 100 employees in each rate plan, and agencies in cost-sharing risk pool. Those are smaller agencies that CalPERS pulls together in a big cost-sharing CalPERS risk pool. And these agencies, the smaller agencies, actually for GASB 68, they do not receive a report from CalPERS. They receive a big report from CalPERS for entire risk pool and allocation percentages for each participating agency, and then they have they're responsible on their own to calculate all of the entries. Bigger plans, like standalone plans, do get GASB 68 reporting from CalPERS directly for them. So there's a difference. And the other difference is cost-sharing risk pool agencies used to get a report for each rate plan. So let's assume a city has a miscellaneous group and safety, let's say police. And each of the groups has Tier 1, Tier 2, and PEPRA. So 6 plans overall. So what CalPERS used to do for agencies like that is provide funding report for each plan. So each year, the city will receive 6 reports. Now CalPERS said, that's enough, that's way too many reports. So what they're doing is they're combining reports by groups, miscellaneous, police, and fire. So the city I gave you as an example will receive only 2 reports, one for miscellaneous that will combine all of the rate plans for miscellaneous, and one for police that will combine all of the police tiers. And the first report, as I mentioned, the first time this change will be enacted is with the new reporting we expect in August. Most of the information provided will be on the combined basis. So you will see much less information than you used to in 3 reports, now in 1. However, there are still pieces of information like normal cost percentages and counts that will be available by each rate plan. And CalPERS announced that change about a year ago, and if you're interested, I would really encourage you to go online and quickly search for this particular topic, and you should be able to find a YouTube presentation, a recording of their presentation from a year ago when they explained the reasoning and what you can see in the report. I only want to point it out because they announced it like a year ago. I bet a lot of you don't remember it anymore, but that's what's coming. If you an agency in cost sharing risk pool, all of a sudden you'll see much fewer reports this year. And obviously, if you were relying on some individual information by rate plans, it might not be available anymore. So if you need something, talk with your CalPERS actuaries. They can help you navigate that. But just be warned that this is coming. And for reasons, CalPERS name for this change is to make them more useful, prevent misinterpretation of the numbers. And I can see an argument for that because when I was consulting clients on their liabilities, they would look in, for example, only classic tier and forget about PEPRA, but you really need to combine them together to see the whole picture. So I can see that argument. And also, they're trying to enhance financial management by combining the reports. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Oh, mm-hmm. That's a great question. So the question was, if an agency wants to do additional discretionary payments and an agency has a specific plan how to apply it, how do you make sure it actually gets applied this way? But sounds like you're saying you have both cost sharing plans and agent standalone plan? Okay, you just should talk with CalPERS. They should be very accommodating and following your wishes how you want to apply it. I believe they would even work with you in terms of to which basis to apply it, not only to which plan. So it should be very easy to do through CalPERS. I do not work with CalPERS directly, but if you want this ADP to go directly to your particular plan, just tell them that and they should be able to accommodate that. They still have all of the information. It's just the issue for you if you're applying it, for example, if you're applying it to standalone plan, it's not a problem. The reporting is still the same. But if you're applying it, for example, you really want to apply it to your classic miscellaneous tier, but you have 3 tiers, for example, tier 1, tier 2, and PEPRA. You're just not going to see direct impact because everything is combined, but it's still going to be applied to that tier. The resulting number is just going to be combined. Does it answer your question? Okay, great. Okay, that's all on pension, and yeah, that's so typical. I'm an OPEB actuary, yet I'm spending most of my time talking about pension. So let's talk about OPEB now. OPEB is other than pension post-retirement benefits. But basically, some agencies provide those benefits to their employees once they retire from the agency. And typical examples would be healthcare, vision, dental, life insurance, things like that. Again, I'm going to be talking here about CalPERS. And again, CalPERS is by far the biggest provider of healthcare benefits for public employees. In fact, they're covering 1.5 million lives. And they're the biggest purchaser of public healthcare in California and second largest in the country, second only to the federal government. So again, it's just most relevant information. And just a reminder, the CalPERS Board of Administration is governing body that sets policies for and makes decisions regarding healthcare benefits. So OPEB, you may or may not have OPEB benefits. And if you even have the OPEB benefits, you may or may not be pre-funding them. Typically, they're not as exuberant as pension. If you do pre-fund your OPEB benefits, though, again, CalPERS tend to be predominant provider for trusts, and they have CRBT trust, and strategy one is by far the most popular with the clients I work with. So here is a historical information on CalPERS returns for specifically CRBT strategy one, and thanks to one of my clients who provided me transactional information for her account, I was able to calculate that investment return for CRBT Strategy 1 for 24-25 was just about 11%, very close to what was just a year ago. Do keep in mind this is a yearly return on investments. We saw all of those ups and downs. Keep in mind when you look at your investment return, it might look different. And the reason is the timing. For example, oh, go ahead.
My strategy, what is that?
Okay, absolutely. So CalPERS allows you to contribute in the OPEB trust with them. An OPEB trust is basically money set aside and can only be used to pay off your OPEB liabilities. And if you go with CalPERS, they offer you an option of 3 strategies: strategy 1, strategy 2, and strategy 3. And the only difference between them is how assets are allocated. Strategy 1 is by far, not by far, strategy 1 is the most aggressive of CalPERS very conservative strategies. Strategy 2 would be less aggressive, and strategy 3 will be the least aggressive. So actually, if you not in CRBT strategy 1, numbers will definitely look very different for you. Historically, returns been lower for strategy 2 and strategy 3 because they're just meant to be less volatile. Less volatility means you have less exposure, but you have less return. Does it answer your question? Okay. So for the last 2 years, we had pretty good investment return on CRBT strategy 1 at roughly about 11% for both years. Again, it's only applicable if you can afford to have a trust and have it with CRBT strategy 1. So what does it mean? Remember that that formula I showed you earlier about net liability? That's basically your liabilities minus your assets. So assets went up. 11% is great. It's quite a bit higher than expected. What happens with our liability? We talked about inflation for pension. Does it have an impact on our OPEB liabilities? Well, yes, it does. Less directly than on pension, but still, high inflation means we're paying more for everything, including our medical costs, including the drugs, everything. So it does trickle in your OPEB benefits as well, just less directly. What's really impacting your liabilities is medical premiums. So that's what I want to focus about in terms of liability for OPEB side. And this isn't all news, and I know that whoever of you guys is in CalPERS already felt the pain, but 2025 calendar year premiums by CalPERS increased significantly. Basic plans increased by roughly 9%, and it ranges from 4% for low increases and just under 15% for high rates that increase high. What about Medicare? Medicare looked really bad. Medicare overall increased by 22.25%. That's huge. And I really don't like looking at the number overall because when you start drilling, you look at, oh, Kaiser actually increased only by 5 to 6%. That's reasonable. But PERS plans increased by 30 to 34%. And United Healthcare increased by 29% in 2025. Why is this important? Is because Medicare premiums matter. If your agency provides benefits for life, you're going to be paying those premiums for your retirees for good 20 or even 30 years. it's a long horizon, and it's really adds up. So it matters how much they increased. And I know that you guys who already are in CalPERS already filed the paying benefit payments every month. They already increased, so you see this impact. But what's gonna also happen is, depending when you did your last actual valuation for your OPEB benefits, you actually may or may not reflect the 2025 premiums. So if they did not, they just didn't have time, then with your new actual study on OPEB, you will see the impact of those increases. It will drive your liability up. It will drive your net liability, net OPEB liability up as well, despite good investment returns. So be prepared for that. And also it will have an impact on your contribution levels if you're pre-funding and trying to stay close to ADC. Oh, sorry. And I also listed here reasons that CalPERS provided for such a drastic increase. And just for your information, their references cost increase, high cost specialty drug use increase, service expansion, and significant changes in federal reimbursement program. So it's specific for Medicare and why those premiums went up so much. So what happened in 26? We actually fortunate right now in terms of timing. CalPERS released their preliminary premiums just a couple of weeks ago, and they're going to be finalized later this month. I do not expect them to change much, if at all. So we have a benefit of knowing what's happening. So what's happening in 2026? Premiums still going up. Luckily not as much as expected, but still pretty significant. Almost 8% for basic plans and just about 11% for Medicare plans. So pretty big. I do want to look at it in a little more details. There are certain plans, for example, Kaiser out of state, for which premiums actually went down a little bit, but there are some, for example, Anthem, Blue Cross, Traditional, and United Healthcare, that went up by more than 12%. Why is it important? Because if you're on CalPERS and in PEMCA get their healthcare benefits, you really should look at your retirees and actives, what they're electing. Are your people, are your retirees in Kaiser premium, Kaiser plans that do not increase as much, or are they in higher increase plans? So it will help you to understand what you're going to see next year and project how much you will have to pay. And also will give you some understanding of, okay, with a new valuation, how bad it's going to hit my particular agencies, depending on the makeup of my retirees and what they're electing. Yes, and these are Medicare premium rates. Remember, overall is 7%, yet if your retirees are in Anthem or Blue Shield, you're out of luck. You're facing 17 to 20% increase. So it really depends where your people are and what did they elect. It's gonna inform how bad your agency is gonna be hit with those increases. And one more thing I wanna say on this is, numbers are big, but please keep in mind your OPEB actually already has a healthcare trend built in. There's definitely an assumption that they're going to go up. The question is, did they assume something low like 4%, or did they assume something higher, closer to 8%? How much they assumed and how much it differs from actual will impact how big of experience gain and loss you're going to see in your next OPEB study. So don't assume you're going to necessarily see an increase of 12% or wherever. No, it's going to be a difference between what was assumed and actually happened. Okay. This is a little bit more information on what CalPERS is saying about 26 premium increases. And on Medicare rates going up, they're talking, again, increased utilization, Inflation Reduction Act, starting with 2026, a lot of the cost will be actually pushed to CalPERS. And the other reason is subsidies are significantly reduced. That's what CalPERS is saying, driving their Medicare rates higher again, second year in a row. Okay, so I want to just do a very quick recap. I know it was a lot of information, some of it good, some of it not, but just as a quick recap, what can we expect? On CalPERS pension, we had better than expected returns for 23, 24, and 24, 25. So what that means for your agency that you're going to be reporting a stable or hopefully even a little lower net pension liability for your accounting. For your funding, you're just not going to see an impact right away. It's going to be spread out over time and just much harder to pinpoint. High inflation. It already started to show up in your funding reports, and it's going to keep trickling in. It is going to be capped at COLA, but it will be trickling in for years to come. And you will see it as experience gain and losses, which will be driving your contribution rates a little bit higher. OPEB. Better than expected returns, if you're able to afford to contribute to the trust, will definitely help lowering your net OPEB liability. However, OPEB is very involved. There's a lot going on, and we just covered premiums and we're going up quite a bit. So it might be offset by other factors as you experience. And OPEB is pretty complicated, and just little things like suddenly a retiree going on disability retirement early will impact your liabilities significantly. So I just cannot predict how your net OPEB liability is gonna look. It really depends on your particular agency. Good investment returns will have a favorable impact on your ADC, but again, so much going on. I am not guaranteeing you it's gonna go down, not necessarily, unfortunately. High medical cost increases, already you know about that because you pay benefits for your retirees, so you see those increases. However, it may or may not be reflected in your prior actual valuation, so be prepared. It is very possible that with your next study, you're going to see drastic increases due to Medicare premiums going up. And 2026 premiums are going up again. Not as bad as 2025, but it just doesn't help. Okay, that was all I had for you today. Thank you for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Okay, seems like we don't have any questions. Thank you.